What becomes of a man when his name is seared off his body? Does he vanish? Or does something ancient rise from the ashes instead? They say Mississippi in the summer of 1839 smelled of cotton husks and scorched earth. The sky never stayed blue for long, always melting into a dense fog that settled low across the fields, thick as breath on glass. The winds whispered through the cypress like something half alive. On such a day, under the gray breath of dawn, a man named Joseph was led shirtless to the forge. He did not beg. He did not cry. He only walked, slow, deliberate, as though each step down the dirt path was the tapping of a drum no one else could hear. They branded him once between the shoulders, a red iron P for problem. They branded him again below the ribs for theft, though no evidence was given, and they branded him a third time across the center of his chest, deep and crooked, for defiance. Each time the iron hissed, steam rising as skin seared and curled. And each time Joseph did not scream. The white men muttered among themselves, unnerved. Reclin, the head overseer, spit on the ground and told him to grunt like a proper mule. Joseph remained silent, his eyes locked on the iron, not the hand that held it, as if he saw something in the flame that no one else could, something. Remembering. They say the iron refused to cool afterward, that the blacksmith tossed it into a barrel of water and the water boiled over. For the rest of the day, Joseph worked in the fields, bare-chested, smoke rising faintly from his skin as he moved through cotton rows like a ghost. No moan, no limp, no curse. Slaves whispered that the pain had gone somewhere else. That it didn't stay in the skin, it went deeper, somewhere quiet, somewhere waiting. The masters mistook his silence for defeat, but the old women in the quarters said different. They said Joseph was listening to the fire, the wind, and the soil, because silence does not always mean surrender. Sometimes it's the only language revenge understands. They said Joseph's silence was submission, but they never asked what he was listening for. Joseph's days began long before sunrise, before the rooster crowed, before the mist even lifted off the cane fields. He woke to the slap of leather against wood and the barking of orders through fog. No bell needed, the whip was always louder. His world was mud and iron, mud in the swamps where he hauled stone to keep the dikes from collapsing, mud in his mouth when he tripped hauling timber, iron on his wrists when Reclin was feeling cruel, which was often. The work never ended. Haul stones, clear the bog path, chop wood, mend broken fences. The Mississippi summer turned sweat to salt, and the salt carved maps on Joseph's back, paths of old scars and fresher ones. His skin looked like cracked earth, a testament to years of being treated as less than a mule. Reclin, the head overseer, watched Joseph like a wolf watches a stag. His whip was his pride, black leather, the handle studded with brass crosses sharpened at the ends. He named it Mercy, though he'd never shown any. Joseph did not speak unless commanded. Even then, his answers were brief, his voice low. He kept his eyes to the ground. That alone seemed to anger Reclin more than any act of defiance. The branding came after Joseph stepped in to stop another enslaved man from being flogged to death. Reclin called it interference. The punishment was fire. They heated the iron until it glowed white. AP was seared into his flesh, problem slave. He bore it without sound, not a flinch, not a breath. Only the smell of burning flesh and a long stare at the iron as it was pulled away. The white men laughed, uneasy. The children, white and black alike, watched in silence. Even the dogs stopped barking. Joseph ate from a shared wooden trough like the others, slept on dirt packed so tight it might as well have been stone, but he moved like a man who'd seen something no one else had. He obeyed every order, but behind his eyes something simmered. They thought him broken. But Joseph was watching, counting seconds, mapping shadows, listening to the iron. He knew that fire has a memory, and it waits. It was the kind of sweltering afternoon when even the air refused to move. The flies gathered thick around the sugar barrels, and sweat clung to every neck like a second skin. Joseph was hauling fence posts by the mule shed when he heard the shouting. Lem, just 13, had slipped while pouring molasses into the overseer's trough. The heavy tin bucket tumbled, dark syrup splashing across Reclin's boots. There was a moment of stillness, brief, taut. Then Reclin moved. With a snarl, he grabbed the nearby iron ladle, still warm from stirring the kettle. The sound of metal on bone was sickening, wet, and sharp. Lem crumpled like soaked parchment, molasses staining the ground beneath his twitching body. No one moved, no one dared. By evening, Lem was gone. Joseph was ordered to dig the grave behind the sugar shed. He said nothing, taking the shovel and walking to the edge of the trees. Each thrust of the blade into the soil was slow, steady. The earth was soft, but his arms burned. When they brought Lem's body wrapped in an old feed sack, Joseph didn't flinch. He lowered him gently, like he was tucking in a younger brother for sleep. He did not cry. He only looked at Lem's face once before the cloth slipped down and the dirt began to fall. The wind picked up as he finished, though the sky was still. The red of the sunset bled through the clouds like fire behind gauze. That night, as others huddled in their quarters, whispering prayers and rage, Joseph walked. Past the corn rows, past the mule stalls, to the overseer's shed. He stood outside the furnace room where the air shimmered with heat and the smell of scorched metal. Through the open window he saw them, branding irons laid out on the rack glowing orange, the fire beneath them hissing and pulsing. He didn't blink. He didn't turn away. He listened to the hiss, to the crackle, to the breath of the flame like it was speaking in a forgotten tongue. Then, almost imperceptibly, Joseph nodded, not in agreement, not in sorrow, in understanding, because something older than anger had stirred in him and it had remembered the taste of iron. After Lem's death, Joseph became a shadow of himself, at least that's what the overseers believed. He moved slower, spoke only when spoken to, never met eyes, never raised his voice above a whisper. He dragged his feet in the mud, kept his hands low and flinched just enough when Reclin passed too close. The masters were satisfied. The branding must have done its work, they said. The boy's death must have broken him, but they weren't listening. Joseph's ears never stopped working. Each morning as he passed the forge, he counted the irons glowing in the rack, 6 on Mondays, 4 by Wednesday. He noted when the coal cart came, when the blacksmith took his meals, how often the shed was left unlocked during supper. He memorized footsteps, boots heavy with rum or light with suspicion. He learned the habits of fire. In the quarters, the elders watched him from their corners. Some nodded to themselves, others clutched their charms tighter. One old woman whispered that Joseph now slept with his back to the hearth, murmuring to the embers like they were kin. "He speaks in smoke," she said, "like them irons done branded his soul too." Joseph began collecting rags quietly, piece by piece. Torn feed sacks, worn shirt sleeves, anything that would hold a spark. He buried them beneath the floorboards. Near the chimney, he stood for long stretches, not moving, just listening. The wind came through there sometimes, cold and steady, curling like breath through stone. He never spoke of Lem, never mentioned the furnace. But one night, as the fires in the quarters dimmed and the whispers gave way to snores, Joseph sat alone outside the hut. A red coal rested on a stone before him, pulsing softly. The wind rustled through the cane rows. The sky was thick with stars, and in that moment, brief and unnoticed, Joseph smiled. Not in joy, not in madness, but the way a man might smile at the sound of a door unlocking in his mind, a quiet smile, the kind that smoke makes when it learns how to climb. The week after Lem was buried, a new overseer arrived on the plantation. His name was Rafferty, a red-faced Irishman with crooked teeth and a laugh like clanging tin. He came with a flask already half drained and a reputation for cruelty earned in Georgia. The slaves quickly learned he was not as sharp as Reclin, but far meaner when drunk, and he was always drunk. Rafferty took one look at Joseph's chest and snorted. "Aye, they marked you good, didn't they? P for what? Prime cut, property prime?" He grabbed Joseph by the chin, forcing his face up to meet his eyes. Joseph didn't flinch, didn't blink. Rafferty's grin faltered for just a breath before he spat at the ground and moved on. That night, strange things began. A hunting dog, mean and eager, refused to approach the furnace shed. It stopped 10 paces away and whimpered, tail tucked, hackles raised, backing away as if the air itself had teeth. Children in the quarters woke up crying. Some said they dreamed of a man with no face standing by the fire, others of irons floating in midair. In the morning, Rafferty found soot smeared across his cabin door in the shape of handprints, long and deliberate. There had been no fires lit nearby, no wind, no footprints in the dirt. He cursed and barked for the cleaning boy, but the boy never came. That afternoon, the firewood pile near the furnace was found soaked to the core, wet as though drenched in a downpour. Yet the skies had been clear for days. At the edge of the sugar fields, an old black preacher stood silently, watching smoke rise from the distant chimney. When asked what he was staring at, he whispered, "When the branded one stops wincin', fire's about to walk." The words spread like damp mold in the quarters. The women whispered them as they stirred pots. The men eyed the shed with wary glances. Even Reclin noticed the drop in voices and the way tools clattered more nervously. Something was shifting, unseen but undeniable. The fire burned hotter now. The air near the forge crackled, even when no one stood near. Joseph moved through it all like wind through ash, silent, steady, listening, before Mississippi, before the brands, before the mud and chains. Joseph was a boy who knew the language of heat. In Maryland, he was born free. His father, Elijah, was a blacksmith of quiet hands and watchful eyes. Their modest home sat near the river bend, where trees grew low and thick with shade. The forge behind the cabin burned most days, smelling of iron, smoke, and sweat. Joseph, small and curious, learned to shape heat into hinges and nails. Elijah taught him how to turn the coals until they glowed like molasses kissed by the sun. He let Joseph hold the tongs, taught him the difference between red flame and blue, between strength and speed. "Fire don't just burn," his father used to say. "It remembers what you ask of it, and if you're kind, it might just answer back." But fire could not stop the raiders. They came one night, white men with torches, shouting runaways and bounty. There had been no crime, no papers, just black skin and fear dressed as law. Elijah fought. He swung iron tongs with a strength that roared, but one bullet stilled him. They found Joseph hiding under the anvil, face streaked with soot and tears. He was 11 when they shackled his wrists and threw him on a cart southbound. The last thing he saw of Maryland was the smoke rising from the forge, black and furious, licking the sky like it was trying to pull his name back. That memory went quiet inside him for years, buried beneath cotton fields and whip cracks. Until now. Now, standing outside the overseer's shed, Joseph felt that same heat, alive and watching. He knew the tools, the bellows, the weight of each tong, the grain of wood on the handles. He knew which coal burned slowest, which sparked fastest, which one left behind the faint, sweet smell of cedar bark. He stood still outside the shed, listening to the fire breathe. And for the first time since he'd been torn from Maryland, he remembered he was not just a man branded. He was a boy of fire, and fire had never forgotten him. Joseph knew the fire was ready before anyone else did. He began limping one morning, just enough to draw attention, just enough to slow his pace. Claimed his chest ached where the brand had bubbled. Reclin sneered and reassigned him to lighter duty near the forge. Let the broken mule sweat where the heat already burned. It was exactly what Joseph wanted. There, alone with the fire, he worked in silence. He cleaned ash trays and hauled coal buckets with quiet precision. But in secret, he gathered embers, red, pulsing coals wrapped in cloth and tucked into a rusted tin box lined with pigskin. He buried it beneath a stack of cracked wood behind the shed. He fashioned a weapon from scrap, a wooden plank shaved down and sharpened at the tip. He scorched the end until it blackened, brittle and sharp like a fang, not meant for killing, meant for lighting. At night he whispered no prayers. He wrote nothing. He simply waited for a sky without a moon. It came on a Saturday, thick clouds, no stars. The barn echoed with laughter, overseers drunk off sour mash, playing dice with greasy fingers. Joseph moved like smoke. He crept to the shed, latched the main door from the outside with a rusted hook and loop. From his tin, he pulled the coals, glowing faintly like buried eyes. He fed them into the side vent of the furnace, stoking with dry rags and sawdust stolen over weeks. The air caught quick. Flames roared from the inside like something waking up angry. Then Joseph did one final thing. He pulled Reclin's whip, Mercy, from the tool rack where it always hung, coiled and smug. He opened the side hatch, let the heat lick his face, and threw it in. The fire howled. From inside, voices turned to screams. One man clawed at the window, eyes melting like wax, skin sloughing from bone. His screams didn't sound human. Joseph did not flinch. He did not run. He stood outside the burning shed, arms folded, the heat painting his branded chest in flickering gold. He watched, like a man watching a letter he had written catch flame and finally be read. The night bloomed with flame. First the furnace shed, then the barn, embers leaping like sparks on wings. The dry Mississippi air fed the blaze, coaxed it across hay bales and timber with unnatural speed. Smoke towered into the black sky, thick and bitter. Horses screamed in their stalls, bolting through split doors into the woods, their hooves pounding like thunder. Men shouted, guns fired into shadows, but the fire didn't care. It danced over rooftops, crept into walls, swallowed wooden beams like kindling. Slaves ran too, some into the cane fields, others toward the river. But not Joseph. He walked, barefoot, bare-chested, the orange light reflecting off the shiny pea burned into his skin. He walked with no urgency, as if the flames were only background music to something much older unraveling in his bones. By dawn, they caught him near the well. He wasn't hiding. He was just standing there, hands behind his back, staring at the water as if it had whispered something to him. Reclin was dead, burned alive in the furnace he had once ruled. Rafferty survived, but barely. Half his face looked like melted wax, one eye gone to ash. He screamed curses at Joseph as they dragged him in chains beneath the big oak at the center of the yard. The master stood there, sweating in a nightshirt, pistol shaking in his grip. "Speak," he demanded. "What did you do, you godless devil? What did you do?" Joseph raised his head slowly, his eyes closed, his lips unmoving. Silence. The master ordered the brand reheated. The iron returned, red and hissing. This time they pressed it against his face, his cheekbone just beneath the eye. The scent of burning flesh curled through the air. Joseph didn't scream, didn't groan, he exhaled just once, and it almost sounded like laughter. A young overseer, barely older than Lem had been, stepped back, eyes wide. He whispered, shaking, "He's smiling. My God, he's smiling." 3 overseers burned. The forge collapsed in on itself before morning. The air hung thick for days with the scent of scorched wood, old leather, and something worse. The quarters were never the same, because fire, once it speaks, leaves silence in its place. And Joseph had never needed to speak at all. The fire changed everything, but not all at once. In the days that followed, the plantation was a shell of itself, blackened timbers, scorched ground, and a silence that clung to the place like mildew. The forge, once the beating heart of punishment and control, stood charred and sagging. Though it was rebuilt in time, no man ever struck iron there again. Workers assigned to it reported tools gone missing, coals refusing to catch, and the faint smell of burning flesh even when no fires were lit. The master, unnerved by sleepless nights and the death of 3 white men under his roof, sold off a quarter of the slaves within the month. Another quarter fled in the confusion. The rest faded into the soil, quiet, watchful, waiting for something more than freedom. Joseph was never seen again. Some said he died on the road, thrown in with a chain gang bound for Louisiana. Others swore they saw him years later in Texas, working quiet as a freedman on a ranch near the border, his face marked but his eyes untouched. A few believed he died that night, swallowed by the fire he had called down. But most simply said he walked away, because the fire had finished what it came to do. The master moved north to St. Louis and never returned. The land changed hands 3 times, but no owner stayed long. And then there were the anniversaries. Every year, on the same moonless night when the flames first rose, smoke would curl up from the field where the furnace once stood, thin, gray, twisting like fingers into the sky, even when the wind was still, even when the earth was dry. No flames, no heat. Just the smell, ash and iron, mingled with something older. Locals began calling it the forged place. Children dared each other to step on the soil. Few ever did, because the orders had burned. The master was gone, and in the place where cruelty once ruled, only silence remained, but not the silence of surrender. The silence of what comes after vengeance. Decades passed. The war came and went, taking masters and titles with it. The cotton rotted in the fields, vines crept over the chimneys, the earth swallowed what it could, but some things refused to vanish. Children in nearby towns spoke in hushed voices of Fireback Field, a stretch of dry, haunted ground where nothing grew and no birds sang. The elders said it used to be a plantation, A forge once stood there, and men were made to kneel before iron and flame. On humid nights, when the air pressed close and the cicadas stopped humming, the field stirred, not loudly, not violently. Just a faint trembling beneath bare feet, like the land itself remembered what it had once held, and what it had released. Old iron brands were sometimes found in the grass, curved, rusted tools shaped like letters and numbers. Strange thing was, they were always cold to the touch, ice cold. Yet if held too long, the smell of burned leather would rise from one's palm. Locals warned each other not to pocket them. One boy tried once. His hands blistered without heat, and for weeks afterward he mumbled in his sleep about the man in smoke. Some visitors claimed to see him, a tall man standing near the base of the old oak tree, unmoving, back turned, shirtless. They said strange marks glowed faintly on his skin, letters scorched and relit, symbols no one could quite read. He never spoke, never moved. But if you got too close, the air changed, grew tight, heavy, like standing in a forge with no fire, only memory. Others didn't see him, but they heard him. A hiss, soft, steady, like steam rolling off iron. No one stayed long at Fireback Field. Not after dark. Years later, a rusted branding iron was discovered lodged in the very center of the oak's trunk, buried deep, as if hammered there by something more ancient than hands. Beneath it, carved so faintly it nearly vanished in bark, were the initials J.A. No one ever claimed to know who put it there. No one ever tried to take it out, because some marks are not meant to be erased. Some names are not written in ink or memory. They branded his body. But the fire remembered his name. What does it mean to carry pain so deep the world tries to burn it out of you and still rise without a word? If Joseph's story moved you, if you felt the heat of silence, the weight of memory, and the fire that never forgot, then ask yourself how many names were lost to the flame and how many still burn beneath our feet. Subscribe to the channel for more untold Black stories of resistance, revenge, and legacy that refused to die, because our ancestors were not voiceless. They were waiting for us to listen.